The package arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine like something from another era. No return address, just my name in elegant cursive that I immediately recognized as Aunt Marjorie's handwriting. I hadn't heard from her in 5 years. Not since the infamous Christmas dinner where my sister Callie had orchestrated what I'll politely call a misunderstanding about my college fund. My name is Lila, and I've spent most of my 22 years trying to stay one step ahead of my sister's schemes. Not that anyone else in my family sees them for what they are. To our parents, Callie is their precious baby girl who can do no wrong, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. I waited until I was alone in my apartment to open the package. Inside was an old silver locket and a letter written on expensive cream-colored stationery. The locket looked familiar. I'd seen it in old family photos around Aunt Marjorie's neck. Dear Lila, the letter began. I trust this finds you well. Recent events have led me to make some important decisions regarding my estate, and I require the presence of you and your immediate family at my home in Vermont for the weekend of the 15th. The enclosed locket belonged to your grandmother. I believe it's time it found its way to the right person. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, looking remarkably like me. The other side held what appeared to be a small key. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Did you get a package from Aunt Marjorie too? Before I could respond, another message popped up. This one from Callie. OMG sis, can you believe it? Aunt M finally remembered we exist. Think she's finally going to share some of that fortune? Winking face. I set the phone down without replying. Of course Callie would immediately jump to money. That's always been her focus. What she can get, what she can manipulate, what she can control. I picked up Aunt Marjorie's letter again, noting a postscript I'd missed. P.S. Choose wisely who you trust with this information. Some treasures are best kept close to the heart. My mother called while I was still pondering this cryptic message. Lila, honey, your father and I just got our invitation. Isn't this exciting? We haven't seen Marjorie since. Well, yeah. Since Callie told her I was planning to sell my college fund to buy drugs, I said dryly. Which was interesting, considering I didn't even have access to that money. Now, sweetie, your sister was just confused about what she heard. She was trying to help. I bit back a retort. No point in rehashing old arguments. Did you get a locket too? A locket? No, just the invitation. Oh! That reminds me, Callie's calling. We'll talk more later, okay? Of course. Callie calling meant everyone else could wait. Some things never change. I studied the locket again, wondering about the key. Aunt Marjorie never did anything without a reason. She was wealthy, yes, but more importantly, she was shrewd. She'd built her fortune through careful observation and strategic decisions. If she was gathering the family now, after years of minimal contact, she had a purpose. My phone lit up with another text from Callie. We should drive up together. Just like old times. I have so much to tell you. I could almost hear the sugary sweetness in her voice, the tone she uses when she's plotting something. Last time I fell for that, I ended up taking the blame for her boyfriend's crashed car. Not this time. Sorry, have to work late Friday. I'll drive up Saturday morning, I replied. The locket felt heavy in my hand, its presence both comforting and unsettling. Whatever Aunt Marjorie had planned, one thing was certain. This weekend would change everything. I just had to make sure I stayed one step ahead of Callie's games. Because this time, I had something she didn't, a grandmother's locket, a mysterious key. And what felt suspiciously like Aunt Marjorie's vote of confidence. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual, each mile adding weight to the locket around my neck. I needed to pack for the Vermont trip, and Mom had insisted I stay the night to make things easier. Nothing in our family was ever easy, especially not since Callie hit her teens and perfected the art of subtle manipulation. I pulled into the driveway just as my father's truck rumbled in behind me. He got out, briefcase in hand, looking tired from another long day at the construction company he managed. There's my girl, he said, giving me a quick side hug. Your sister's already inside, helping your mother plan the trip. Of course she was. I forced a smile and followed him in. The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. Mom was making her famous lasagna while Callie perched on a counter, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered, her face brightening with practiced perfection. Finally, I was just telling Mom about this adorable little bed and breakfast near Aunt Marjorie's. We should totally stop there for lunch on the way up. I thought you were driving up with Mom and Dad, I said, setting my overnight bag down. Change of plans. Dad needs the truck for a job site visit, so Mom suggested we take your car. It'll be just like when we were kids. I caught the slight smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. My car. Of course. Her own had mysteriously developed engine trouble last week, probably right after Aunt Marjorie's invitation arrived. Honey, can you set the table? Mom called out, clearly sensing the tension. Frank, wash up for dinner. As I grabbed plates from the cabinet, I heard my parents' voices drift down from upstairs. Could be a real opportunity for Callie, my father was saying. You know Marjorie always had a soft spot for her. I just hope this weekend goes smoothly, Mom replied. After what happened with the college fund situation. Water under the bridge. Besides, Callie was only trying to help her sister. She's grown up a lot since then. I nearly dropped a plate. They still believed that story? The sound of footsteps sent me scrambling to finish setting the table, my hands shaking slightly with suppressed anger. Dinner was an exercise in restraint. Callie dominated the conversation with stories about her volunteer work at the local animal shelter, work I knew for a fact she'd quit months ago. Mom and Dad ate it up, beaming with pride. Oh! Callie exclaimed suddenly. Lila, what's that around your neck? Is that from Aunt Marjorie? All eyes turned to the locket. I instinctively touched it, noting how Callie's eyes tracked the movement. Just an old family piece, I said carefully, remembering Aunt Marjorie's warning about trust. How lovely, Mom said. Though it's interesting she only sent one. I'm sure Aunt Marjorie has her reasons, Callie cut in smoothly. She's always been particular about things. Later that night, I was unpacking in my old room when Callie appeared in the doorway, still wearing that perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. So, she said, leaning against the doorframe. What else was in the package? Besides the locket. Just the invitation, same as everyone else. She studied me for a moment, head tilted slightly. You know, I've been thinking about that Christmas dinner. About how things got so mixed up. Maybe it's time we cleared the air? I met her gaze steadily. Maybe it is. Great. We'll have plenty of time to talk during our drive up. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Lila? You might want to be careful with that locket. Old clasps can be so unreliable. After she left, I checked the locket's clasp. It was perfectly secure, but her warning was clear enough. I pulled out my phone and booked a hotel room in Vermont for Friday night. Whatever game Callie was playing, I wasn't about to let her get the upper hand. As I lay in bed, I could hear her moving around in her room next door, humming softly to herself. The same tune she used to hum when we were kids, right before she'd blame me for something she'd done. Some things never change. But this time, I had a feeling Aunt Marjorie was counting on exactly that. Aunt Marjorie's estate loomed against the darkening Vermont sky, its Victorian architecture a stark reminder of older, more elegant times. I arrived just before sunset, having successfully avoided Callie's carpool ambush by leaving at dawn. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires as I pulled up behind an unfamiliar black SUV. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing Aunt Marjorie's housekeeper, Mrs. Chin. Miss Lila, she said with a slight bow. Your aunt is in the library. The others haven't arrived yet. I followed her through the familiar hallways, noting subtle changes since my last visit. New security cameras dotted the corners, their red lights blinking steadily. The old portraits of family members seemed to watch my progress, their eyes following my movement. Aunt Marjorie stood at her desk, examining what looked like old photographs. She looked exactly as I remembered, steel gray hair in a perfect chignon, posture straight as a ruler, eyes sharp as ever. Right on time, she said, not looking up. And alone, I see. I thought it best to drive separately. Indeed. She finally met my gaze. I trust you brought the locket? I touched it instinctively. Yes, and the key inside it. Good. Your sister has been calling all morning, asking about arrival times and sleeping arrangements. Quite concerned about everyone's comfort. Her tone carried a hint of amusement. Tell me, has she always been so? Attentive? Before I could answer, voices echoed from the foyer. Callie's laugh rang out, followed by Mom's softer tones. Aunt Marjorie's expression hardened slightly. Your room is in the east wing, third door on the right. You might want to settle in before dinner. And Lila, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Keep your eyes open this weekend. Not everything is as it appears. I'd barely finished unpacking when Callie burst into my room without knocking. There you are. I can't believe you left without me this morning. Mom was so disappointed. I told you I had an early start planned. She flopped onto my bed, somehow making even that look graceful. Well, you missed out. I found the most amazing little antique shop on the way up. The owner knew all about Aunt Marjorie's collection. Did you know she has some really valuable pieces? I watched her examine her perfectly manicured nails, noting the calculated casualness of her pose. Is that why you're so interested in this weekend? The valuable pieces? Don't be silly. I'm just trying to show an interest in our family history. She sat up suddenly. Speaking of which, that locket looks heavy. Want me to put it in the safe for you? I already asked Aunt Marjorie for the combination, for my jewelry, of course. I'll keep it with me, thanks. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Suit yourself. Oh! I almost forgot. I'm in the room next door, just like at home. Isn't that perfect? After she left, I did a thorough check of my room. Sure enough, I found a small notebook wedged between the mattress and headboard. Callie's distinctive handwriting filled the pages with what looked like plans and notes. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. The first page made my blood run cold. Detailed observations about Aunt Marjorie's daily routine, notes about the security system, and a list of the estate's most valuable items with estimated prices. A knock at the door made me jump. Dinner in 10 minutes, Mrs. Chen called out. I quickly photographed several pages with my phone and returned the notebook exactly as I'd found it. My hands were shaking as I straightened my clothes. The dining room was already tense when I arrived. Mom and Dad sat on one side of the massive table, Callie on the other, leaving spaces beside her conspicuously open. Aunt Marjorie sat at the head, watching everyone with those penetrating eyes. Lila, she said as I entered, please sit here, next to me. I caught Callie's flash of annoyance as I took my seat. The locket felt heavy against my chest, its key pressing into my skin like a reminder of secrets yet to be unlocked. Dinner was about to begin, but I had a feeling the real games were just getting started. The dinner started quietly enough, with only the soft clink of silver against china breaking the tension. Aunt Marjorie had arranged us strategically, me at her right hand, Callie between our parents, directly across from me. The massive oak table felt like a battlefield. I've been going through some old photographs, Aunt Marjorie announced, nodding to Mrs. Chen, who began distributing thick manila envelopes to each of us. I thought we might take a little trip down memory lane. I opened my envelope and froze. The top photo showed Callie and me as children, playing in Aunt Marjorie's garden. But it was the background that caught my eye, a familiar ornate safe, its door slightly ajar, visible through the window behind us. Oh, look at this one, Callie exclaimed, holding up a different photo. Remember that Christmas, Lila? When we were decorating the tree. The Christmas she'd blamed me for stealing from Aunt Marjorie's jewelry box. I noticed how her fingers trembled slightly as she shuffled through the photos, her eyes darting to each one as if searching for something specific. Interesting choice of photographs, Marjorie, Dad said, examining one closely. Some of these I've never seen before. I've always believed in keeping thorough records, Aunt Marjorie replied, taking a measured sip of wine. One never knows when the past might become relevant to the present. Callie's fork clattered against her plate. Speaking of the present, Aunt Marjorie, I'd love to hear more about your art collection. That new security system must have cost a fortune. Indeed. Aunt Marjorie's eyes flickered to the camera in the corner. Though some investments are worth every penny. Don't you agree, Lila? I touched the locket reflexively, remembering Callie's notebook. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't what they appear to be. Mom cleared her throat nervously. The lasagna is lovely, Mrs. Chen. Would anyone like seconds? Actually, Callie stood suddenly. I'm feeling a bit dizzy. Must be the travel. Lila, would you help me to my room? Before I could respond, Aunt Marjorie spoke. Mrs. Chen can assist you. Lila and I have some matters to discuss regarding her grandmother's locket. I caught a flash of something dark in Callie's eyes before she composed herself. Of course. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. After they left, our parents excused themselves to make some phone calls, leaving me alone with Aunt Marjorie. She waited until the door closed behind them. The key in your locket, she said quietly, opens more than just one lock. Your grandmother was very particular about who she trusted with her secrets. What secrets? Instead of answering, she handed me another photograph. This one showed my grandmother standing in front of a painting, the same locket around her neck. But it was the painting that made my breath catch. I'd seen it listed in Callie's notebook with a 7-figure price estimate. Your sister's been asking about that painting, Aunt Marjorie said. Among other things. Tell me, have you found anything interesting in your room? The notebook burned in my memory. I'm not sure what you mean. No. She stood, walking to a nearby cabinet. Then perhaps you'd be interested to know that your grandmother left explicit instructions about her inheritance. Instructions that specifically mentioned both you and your sister. A crash from upstairs interrupted us, followed by muffled voices. Aunt Marjorie didn't even flinch. You should check on your sister, she said, her voice heavy with meaning. But remember, sometimes protecting someone means being willing to expose their darkest truths. I hurried upstairs to find Callie's door locked, voices arguing inside. As I raised my hand to knock, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The key from my locket was missing. Through the door, I heard Callie's voice. It has to be here somewhere. Keep looking. I stepped back, my mind racing. The notebook, the photographs, the missing key, everything was connected, but I couldn't see the full picture yet. One thing was clear, whatever game Callie was playing, she wasn't working alone. The question was, who else was involved, and how far would they go to get what they wanted? I waited in the shadows of the library until nearly midnight, watching Callie's room through the window across the courtyard. When her light finally went out, I pulled out my phone and checked the photos I'd taken of her notebook one last time. There was a pattern to her notes, references to specific paintings, dates, and what looked like security rotation schedules. The sound of footsteps made me duck behind a bookshelf. Through the gaps between books, I saw Dad walking past, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, everything's going according to plan, he whispered. Marjorie doesn't suspect a thing. Just make sure you're ready when. Hold on. He glanced around, then moved further down the hallway. My heart pounded against my ribs. Dad was involved? Before I could process this, another figure slipped into the library, Callie, supposedly asleep in her room. She went straight to the painting our grandmother had been photographed with, running her fingers along the frame. The key from my locket glinted in her other hand. I know you're here, Lila, she said without turning around. You were always terrible at hiding. I stepped out from behind the shelves. Like you were terrible at telling the truth? Truth. She laughed softly. You want the truth? Fine. That Christmas when I accused you of stealing? I did it because Aunt Marjorie had just told me she was considering paying for your college instead of mine. When I found out about her art collection's real value, Dad suggested we work together to protect our family's interests. By stealing from her? By taking what should have been ours all along. She spun to face me, her composure cracking. Do you know what it's like living in your shadow? Perfect Lila, who never does anything wrong. Who gets all the praise, all the opportunities, while I'm just invisible. That's not true, isn't it? Even now, she gave you grandmother's locket, not me. You're sitting at her right hand at dinner, not me. It's always been you. The bitterness in her voice made me step back. Callie, save it. I found grandmother's letter in Marjorie's study. The inheritance was supposed to be split between us, but Marjorie changed everything after that Christmas. She wrote me off because of one mistake, and you let her. You framed me for theft. I was 15. And scared. Dad said if we didn't secure our future, we'd end up with nothing. Her hands trembled as she held up the key. This isn't just about some paintings. There's more hidden here. Documents, accounts, things that could change everything. Help me find them, Lila. Please. For once, be on my side. For a moment, I saw the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But then I remembered the notebook, the calculated plans, Dad's secretive phone call. What's really going on, Callie? What are you telling me? Before she could answer, the library lights blazed on. Aunt Marjorie stood in the doorway, Mrs. Chen beside her with a tablet displaying security camera feeds. I think, Aunt Marjorie said quietly, it's time we all had an honest conversation about legacy, loyalty, and lies. Callie's face went white. I can explain. Can you explain this? Aunt Marjorie held up a familiar notebook, not Callie's copy, but what looked like the original. Your father's handwriting is quite distinctive, especially when planning how to rob his own aunt. I looked between them, my sister's crumbling facade, our aunt's steely resolve, and through the window. Our father's figure hurrying across the courtyard toward the library. The key felt heavy in Callie's hand, our grandmother's locket empty around my neck. Whatever truth was about to come out would shatter our family forever. And I had to choose, protect my sister's secrets or expose everything and risk losing her completely. The sound of our father's footsteps grew closer, and with it, the weight of a decision that would change everything. Dad burst into the library, freezing when he saw all of us. His eyes darted between the notebook in Aunt Marjorie's hands and Callie's trembling form. What's going on here? Funny, Aunt Marjorie said. I was about to ask you the same thing, Frank. Perhaps you'd like to explain these detailed plans for emptying my safe? Or why you've been manipulating your daughters against each other for years? Mom appeared in the doorway behind him, her face pale. Frank, it's not what you think, Dad started, but Callie cut him off. Don't lie anymore. She threw the key at him, missing by inches. You promised if I helped, we'd all benefit. That Lila would finally see how it feels to be the one left out. But you were just using me, weren't you? I stepped toward my sister, but she backed away. Don't. You're probably in on it too. You and Aunt Marjorie, plotting together like always. Actually, Aunt Marjorie opened the notebook. Lila was never part of this. According to your father's notes, she was meant to take the blame when the theft was discovered. Just like that Christmas 5 years ago. The room spun. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Dad? Is that true? He straightened his shoulders, something hardening in his expression. You don't understand. The construction company is failing. When I found out about Marjorie's plan to leave everything to you, Lila, I had to protect our family's future. By destroying mine? My voice cracked. You've always been stronger, he said. More capable of handling setbacks. Callie needed the advantages more. Mom made a choke sound. You told me the company was fine. That all those late nights were for expansion projects. The late nights, Mrs. Chen spoke up, were spent cataloging the estate's valuables with an underground art dealer. She held up her tablet, showing security footage of Dad meeting with someone in the garden. Enough, Callie screamed. She grabbed the painting off the wall, making everyone jump. Nobody moves, or I'll destroy it. This is worth millions, right? That's what you told me, Dad. Callie, think about what you're doing. Dad stepped toward her. Like you thought about what you were doing to Lila? To all of us. Her hands shook as she held the painting. I believed you when you said she was the favorite. That we had to stick together. But you were just using me to get to her, weren't you? I saw it happening before anyone could move, Callie's grip loosening, the painting tilting. Without thinking, I lunged forward just as it slipped from her hands. We both crashed to the floor, the painting between us. In the chaos that followed, I barely registered Mom calling the police, or Dad trying to run, or Mrs. Chen blocking his path. All I could focus on was Callie, curled into herself, sobbing like she hadn't since we were kids. I didn't know, she kept whispering. I swear I didn't know he wanted to. Aunt Marjorie knelt beside us, her voice gentle but firm. The painting's a fake. I replaced the real ones weeks ago, when I first suspected Frank's plan. The entire weekend was a test, one that revealed far more than I anticipated. I looked at my family, truly seeing them for the first time. Mom, shattered but standing straight. Dad, defeated and desperate. Callie, broken by the weight of her own actions. And me, caught in the middle, trying to protect everyone but myself. The sound of sirens grew closer. Aunt Marjorie touched my shoulder. Sometimes, dear, the hardest part of loving someone is knowing when to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. I helped Callie up, feeling the distance between us, no longer just physical, but filled with years of manipulation and lies. The sister I'd tried so hard to shield was both victim and accomplice, and I had no idea how to bridge that gap. As the police lights flashed through the windows, I realized that saving my family might mean letting it fall apart first. The thought left me hollow, empty as the locket around my neck. The morning after Dad's arrest, Aunt Marjorie gathered us in her study. Mom sat rigid in an armchair, while Callie huddled in the window seat, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The police had questioned us for hours, but this felt more daunting than any interrogation. Before I make my announcement, Aunt Marjorie began, "There's something you should know." The original plan was to leave everything to Callie. My head snapped up. Callie's eyes widened. "What?" we said in unison. "Your grandmother's last wish was for her estate to go to the younger sister, to balance out life's natural advantages given to the firstborn." Aunt Marjorie's eyes met mine. But she also left me discretion to judge character. Callie stood abruptly. "So this whole weekend was just another test? Another chance to prove I'm not good enough?" "No," Aunt Marjorie said softly. "It was a chance to prove you were better than the role your father assigned you." She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a stack of letters. "These are from Frank, dating back 5 years. Detailed plans to pit you against each other, to manipulate family dynamics for his benefit. He knew about the inheritance plan all along." Mom made a choke sound. "He used our daughters as pawns?" "The real test," Aunt Marjorie continued, "wasn't about the money or the art. It was about truth. About choosing who you want to be when everything falls apart." Callie's hands trembled as she reached for the letters. "I don't understand. If I was supposed to get everything, why give Lila the locket? Why make me feel like I was always second best?" "Because the locket was never about inheritance. It was about protection." Aunt Marjorie stood, walking to the painting that had nearly shattered last night. She pressed something behind the frame, and a hidden panel clicked open. "The key opens this." Inside was a single envelope, addressed to both of us in our grandmother's handwriting. "Your grandmother knew about Frank's financial troubles, his tendency to manipulate. She wanted to protect both of you, but differently. Lila needed strength to stand her ground. You, Callie, needed a chance to choose your own path." I moved to stand beside my sister as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and 2 smaller envelopes, one marked Freedom, the other Legacy. "Choose," Aunt Marjorie said. "But choose together." Callie's hand found mine, surprising us both. "I'm tired of choosing against you," she whispered. We opened the Legacy envelope first. Inside was a deed to the estate, in both our names. The Freedom envelope contained offshore account details, enough money for both of us to start fresh, far from family obligations. "The real inheritance," Aunt Marjorie said, "isn't about money. It's about breaking cycles. Your grandmother hoped you'd learn to protect each other, not compete." Callie's grip on my hand tightened. "I wanted to hate you," she said, voice cracking. "It was easier than admitting Dad was wrong. That I was wrong. We were all wrong," I replied. "But maybe that's not the end of the story." Mom stood, wiping her eyes. "Whatever you choose, we'll support you. Both of you. It's time this family stopped taking sides." Callie and I looked at each other, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. I saw past her facade to the sister who used to share my dreams, who got lost somewhere between Dad's manipulation and her own fears. "Together?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Together." We turned to Aunt Marjorie, who watched us with knowing eyes. The morning sun caught the empty locket around my neck, no longer a weight but a reminder. Sometimes the greatest act of protection isn't shielding someone from consequences, but standing beside them as they face them. "We choose both," we said in unison. Aunt Marjorie smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud." Now, shall we discuss how to turn this legacy into something new? Something that heals rather than divides. Outside, police cars still sat in the driveway, a reminder of all we'd lost. But as Callie squeezed my hand, I felt something we'd thought broken beginning to mend. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to start again. 6 months after that weekend at Aunt Marjorie's, I stood in front of the newly renovated Victorian building that would house our family foundation. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. Callie emerged from inside, clipboard in hand. The contractor says we can start moving furniture in next week. I've already lined up 3 local charities for our first grant cycle. She'd thrown herself into the foundation work with the same intensity she once used for manipulation. But different now, focused outward instead of in. The therapy sessions we'd both started had helped, though some days were harder than others. "Have you visited Dad?" I asked, noting how she stiffened slightly. "Last week." "He's different. Quieter." She set down the clipboard. "He asked about you." "I'm not ready." "I know." She touched my arm briefly, these small gestures of comfort still new between us. "Mom's coming by later to help with the donor database. Unless that's too much family for one day." I smiled despite myself. We were learning this new language of consideration, of asking instead of assuming. "It's okay. Actually, I found something I want to show you both." Inside my office, I pulled out the locket. We hadn't talked about it since that night, but it had stayed with me, a reminder of choices made and unmade. Remember how we never found what the key was supposed to open? I pressed the edge of the locket in a particular way, and a hidden compartment clicked open. Inside was a tiny folded paper I'd discovered yesterday. Callie leaned closer as I unfolded it. Our grandmother's handwriting was faded but clear. "The greatest inheritance is the choice to break the chains that bind us." All this time, Callie whispered, we thought it was about money or property. Maybe that's why we needed to lose everything to understand it. The foundation's front door chimed. Mom walked in, looking stronger than she had in months. The divorce proceedings had been hard, but she stood straighter now, no longer bending to keep peace at any cost. "Girls? Aunt Marjorie just called. She's coming for the opening next week." Mom paused, seeing our expressions. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said, showing her the note. "We're just realizing something about inheritance." She read it, tears welling up. "Your grandmother always did play the long game. Like someone else we know." We all smiled, thinking of Aunt Marjorie's elaborate scheme to expose Dad's manipulation and force us to confront our own choices. Callie picked up her clipboard again, but hesitated. "I've been thinking about changing the foundation's name. Instead of using our family name, maybe we could call it the Choice Foundation. You know, for Grandma." "I like it," I said, watching her face light up with genuine pride instead of calculated charm. Later, as sunset painted the building's Victorian facade in shades of gold, I stood in what would become our main conference room. The walls were lined with family photos, not just the perfect posed ones, but the real moments too. Joy, pain, healing, all of it part of our story. Mom and Callie were downstairs, arguing good-naturedly about carpet samples. Their voices drifted up, no longer carrying the edge of past tensions. I took out Grandma's note one more time. Below the line about inheritance was another, so faded I'd missed it at first. P.S. The key also opens the small box in Marjorie's garden shed. Some secrets are worth waiting for. I smiled, tucking the note away. Some mysteries could wait. For now, we had a foundation to build, not just the charitable one, but the deeper foundation of trust between us. Still fragile, but growing stronger each day. The locket hung empty around my neck now, its key given to Callie as a symbol of our shared guardianship of this new legacy. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And maybe that's what Grandma meant all along, that true inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we choose to build from the ruins of what we thought we wanted. Outside, the sun set on our family's new beginning, casting long shadows that reminded us where we'd been, but didn't define where we were going.